The 1990s find the Americas at a critical moment in their long history. After years of struggle, many of these nations have rejoined the democratic world.
Up to the very day of the plebiscite, we didn't believe it was possible to vote out the dictatorship with a pencil. That with a pencil, saying no, we could defeat such a brutal dictatorship.
It's a fragile success. The Americas are now enduring some of their worst economic conditions ever.
As long as there are illiterates, people dying of hunger in the streets, and a minimum wage of $50 a month, you can't speak of democracy.
Every day there are challenges: drugs, military death squads, guerrillas.
We will transform society with violence. No violence, no change.
Milagre brasileiro, só a sua história eu li.
Which paths will the Americas take? They are our allies, our major trading partners, our closest neighbors. Their choices will change our lives. And we are connected in another way. In the next decade, people from the Americas will become our largest minority. Already their impact has been tremendous, challenging some of our most fundamental ideas about America.
The melting pot is really a dangerous place. You don't really bubble up to the surface. You just sort of like become sludge at the bottom.
We have to exercise our rights. If they don't give them to us, we must take them. We must fight together.
Luchando juntos.
The Americas, 33 nations, 500 million people. And all of them as much Americans as we are.
Major funding for Americas was provided by the Annenberg CPB project. Additional funding provided by Carnegie Corporation of New York, the John D. and Catherine T. MacArthur Foundation, the Rockefeller Foundation, the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, and viewers like you.
You no doubt wish to see the garden.
The garden?
The Garden of Forking Paths.
In a story by Argentina's most celebrated writer, Jorge Luis Borges, there is a world where time behaves oddly. At crucial moments, time divides into separate branches. All possible outcomes occur. In the Garden of Forking Paths, the best and the worst of all possible worlds exist side by side. Carlos Menem is president of Argentina. His country began the 20th century as one of the world's richest nations, a country which often thought of itself as different from the rest of Latin America. By the time Menem was elected president in 1989, that self-image had to be revised. Argentina faced many of the same problems as its neighbors: crippling inflation, political instability, painful scars from a recent military regime. President Menem decided to appeal to national pride. He announced that the peso and Argentina would once again be strong. But national pride must be based on a shared sense of national identity, and in Argentina, as in much of the region, there is a long history of conflict over what and who defines the nation. Across Latin America, nationality has been forged out of diversity. Argentina, unlike countries further to the north, has relatively few Indian and African roots. Here, diversity stems from the millions of immigrants who came, mostly from Europe, around the turn of the century. Argentina is as much a nation of immigrants as the United States.
Mis padres eran de Siria. Papá vino primero a Argentina.
My parents came to Argentina from Syria. Dad came first.
Una pequeña fortuna, diría yo.
He made a small fortune working as a traveling salesman. I'm the son of first-generation immigrants, and here I am, president of my country.
Here in Buenos Aires, the early immigrants had first seen the wealth and promise that drew millions to Argentina. In 1992, Menem tried to revive this image. Seizing on historic events in Europe, he offered to receive up to 300,000 newcomers from the former Soviet countries. Oleg and Elena Belenki are from Ukraine. Before they came here, their knowledge of Argentina was shadowy.
In Soviet Union, we read big Soviet encyclopedia that it's a very beautiful country. There are a lot of Indians and Hispanians and Italians. And all people here speak only Spanish. It was for us news for us. We thought that all people here speak English. And what else? Maybe song. Затем скажите, вам чужая Аргентина? Вот вам история Каховского раввина, который жил в такой прекрасной обстановке, в таком чудесном городе Каховке.
The tango is a reminder that not all the immigrants who flocked to Argentina found the fortune they were seeking. For them, the tango, created in the Buenos Aires melting pot around the turn of the century, was more than a dance. It was a song of disappointment and broken dreams.
Cuando rajé los tamangos, buscando ese mango que te haga volver. La indiferencia del mundo, que el sordo y el mudo recién se tira.
By World War I, tango had broken out of the slums and brothels of Buenos Aires to become for a while a worldwide dance fashion. In Argentina, the tango still fills the air. Perhaps because it remains a better expression of the country's elusive national identity than anything its politicians have been able to devise.
Muy bien.
Not far from the cramped immigrant districts was another quite different Buenos Aires. In the 1880s, Argentina's landed families set out to build a metropolis worthy of their growing wealth and importance. They looked to France as their model of elegance and progress. Even their Columbus faces back towards Europe. Here they lie today, obstinately clinging to their grandeur. Among the mausoleums in the Recoleta, Buenos Aires' cemetery for the privileged dead, is the vault of the wealthy Escurra family. Pedro Escurra was sent off at the turn of the century to draw maps of Argentina's remote borders. His daughter Marta, now over 90 years old, went with him.
My first clear memories are from 1903. Flames and a ghastly roaring noise. I was really scared. It was later explained to me that this was the campsite that Father had set up by Iguazu Falls. He was drawing out the boundary between Argentina and Brazil. Here's a photograph of Father looking at the falls. The fire I remember was the bonfire for scaring away snakes. The noise was the falls. And to think that my mother was riding those rapids with us in canoes towed by the locals.
As she grew up, Marta had all the privileges of a wealthy landowning family during Argentina's most prosperous decades.
It was a completely different way of life. We lived like a big patriarchal family. All the neighborhood children would come home to play, the grocer's children and all the others, even the little black children, who were all very well brought up. There was a living democracy, just naturally. Nothing was imposed. There was, of course, a sense of superiority, but it was a friendly, familiar thing.
The oligarch's view of Argentina as one large and benevolent landed estate dominated all other national images for the first decades of the century. But not without a fight. With the immigrant workers came new European political ideas: socialism, trade unionism, anarchism. This movie of the time reconstructed the showdown that erupted in 1919 between old and new Argentina. For the first time, the military was called in to crush angry strikers. Vigilante gangs beat and killed hundreds of immigrants, calling them foreigners and Jewish agitators. Traditional Argentina had knocked down a challenger that would stay down for a generation. The country could return to its golden age. For a few, the golden age still shines. One of Argentina's forking paths leads to a delightful world where at the end of the driveway is a polo field. The Argentine national anthem announces the start of a tournament with boys from Argentina, Chile, Spain, Australia, and England.
There are 8 boys from England who've come over, all members of the Pony Club, all very pleased to be here and all having a most wonderful time in the center of world polo.
In this suburb in the Pampas, near Buenos Aires, many of the polo fields are on private estates. Around here, people invite each other over for Sunday lunch and a few chukkers. The man who embodies Argentine polo is Horacio Egui. Himself a former international player, he has 4 sons who represent Argentina and play so well that tournament rules disbar them from taking the field together.
La Pampa es una gran llanura que es una enorme cancha de polo.
The Pampas is a great plain that is one huge polo field. All you have to do is cut the grass, and it turns into a polo field.
Y se convierte automáticamente en una cancha de polo.
Eggy's business is cattle, which he sells in the Laniers stockyard in Buenos Aires. The average Argentine eats almost twice as much beef as someone from the United States. Eggy's office is run by Alfredo Campanelli.
Today we had 19,200 head coming to the market. Many years ago, there'd be between 25 and 30,000.
This market was once one of the engines that drove Argentina. The economics were simple. Beef, grain, and wool flowed out of the ports, and foreign-made goods flowed in. But building the groundwork for such systems took money, foreign money. In Argentina, by far the largest investor was Great Britain. British companies built and owned most of the railways, the docks, and the meat-packing houses. The result was a pact between landowners and powerful foreigners, which to many Argentines seemed like a colonial relationship.
Dedico esta exposición al gran pueblo argentino.
In general, I would say that Argentina has always been so much connected with Great Britain that, you know, Argentines really look up to anything English. Clothes, the language, sports, the habits, I mean, that sort of thing.
Maria Elena Mulville, an Argentine, and her British husband, Julian, run a dairy farm on his family estate in the Pampas. Julian can trace his presence here to the British railroads. His father, a civil engineer, built bridges and viaducts.
In those early years of the century, Argentina was booming, and he did very well building, contracting for the railways until he bought this farm when he was retiring from the business.
Here was the key to Argentina's wealth. Huge tracts of some of Latin America's richest soil. But with so much of its wealth dependent on a single source, agricultural exports, Argentina was as vulnerable as the rest of the region to foreign decisions beyond its control. In the Depression of the 1930s, the boom went bust. Now, the cattle come to the Buenos Aires market by road. The train lines that once converged on the stockyards are abandoned, reminders of a past age. On top of the railway tracks, a shanty town has grown up. A 1,000 miles from Buenos Aires, close to the Andes, there is another Argentina. It's easy to forget that this, too, is Argentina. The Northwest has been neglected by the national government for generations. It remains economically stagnant, its people impoverished. Once upon a time, it was the other way round. In the 16th and 17th century, these northern regions were the closest to the heartland of Spain's American empire. By order of the Spanish crown, all goods to faraway Buenos Aires had to be sent from Lima. Mule trains would toil through these mountains on an immensely long southward journey with taxes at every stage. The port city and the Northwest, the landholders and the immigrants. Like the parallel worlds in Borges' Garden of Forking Paths, Argentina made little progress in linking these worlds with a unifying concept of nationhood until the 1940s. Then a new player entered the garden. Juan Domingo Perón managed for a while to embrace more of the numerous Argentinas than any leader before him. Perón's own world was the military, which seized power in 1943. His inspired idea was to wed the military to its least likely ally, the workers. Perón's rise to power began quietly when he took the minor office of Secretary for Labor in the military government. Humberto Fiorito was a worker on the Tafí Viejo Railroad in Argentina's depressed Northwest.
When Perón came and imposed the social laws we still benefit from today, it brought a complete turnabout for the Argentine working class. The worker moved from misery to the satisfaction of having access to housing, better food, decent clothes. And the man responsible for that radical change was Perón. So I say God sent us Perón to improve the lot of the Argentine working class.
It was a time when hundreds of thousands of rural workers, many of them mestizos, were leaving for the cities. The sons of the immigrants also now had the vote as Argentine citizens. Together they made a new power base for Perón. But one group was deliberately left out, the landowners.
They created an artificial antagonism. The Argentina that was one big family was lost. There was hatred between the classes, which hadn't existed before.
I remember instances with people working, helping with work at home. And all of a sudden, I mean, they felt respect before, or you felt that they felt respect. And their attitude changed. Not so much because they felt they had more rights, but because you felt that they hated you a little bit.
The military regime was actively anti-communist, as its propaganda films showed. Perón's pro-union policies worried his superiors. He replied that by siding with the unions, he was building a defense against communism. For the landowners and exporters, it became hard to tell the remedy from the disease.
I remember we would often come here to the market, and the cattle hadn't arrived because the union was on strike.
Yo estimo que eso pudo haber sido.
I think that was one of the problems that hit the landowners.
Afectó quizás al campo, a la comercialización.
And hurt the cattle trade and the meat
A la
exports.
exportación de las carnes.
The military rulers agreed. By 1945, they had had enough of Perón.
New political explosions rock Argentina as Colonel Juan Perón, strongman vice president, is forced to resign by the military clique that rules this country of 14 million people.
Perón was placed under arrest. Then, in the most remarkable demonstration in Argentina's history, hundreds of thousands of workers poured into Buenos Aires and demanded his release. The army gave in, but the anti-Perón faction in the military remained, biding its time. Soon after his release, Perón was elected president. Enrique Pavón Pereira was Perón's secretary.
Dice, yo no creo que no haya sido sensible, porque no he sentido en mi vida un dolor ajeno sin acudir a calmar ese dolor.
Sacrificarnos o morir por otra bandera que no sea la que está en ese mar.
No he escuchado una arbitrariedad sin que haya puesto mi corazón para evitarlo, para modificar la ley, para que los pobres, los necesitados, los sumergidos recibieran parte de esa ley, de esa reparación y de esa justicia. Y cuando esto no ha sido posible, cuando alguien me ha pedido mi mano, me he cortado las dos para darlas definitivamente en prueba y testimonio de mi verdad. Esto es Perón.
Perón was now all-powerful, but with a power that depended on pleasing the crowd. In this, he had an ideal ally, his new wife Eva, whose rise from obscure poverty added to his appeal among workers. Perón promised social justice and a strong nation. The most symbolic of his nationalist policies was the purchase of the British-owned railways for Argentina. Now they were Argentine. Perón's government also lavished money on new Argentine industries, creating jobs for his supporters and a new breed of industrialists. One of them was Jorge Antonio. Under his friend Perón, he set up a factory to build Mercedes-Benz trucks in Argentina and made a fortune. It was a time when many Latin American countries were trying to break free of foreign imports.
It wasn't just an Argentine phenomenon, but in Argentina it had exceptionally effective support from the government. That meant that after the war, the prospects for industrialization were real in Argentina. I believed in it and threw myself into it.
But someone had to pay for all this. Perón forced landowners to sell to the state, taxing the profits to pay for industrialization.
All that was very damaging to the country, because the country's strength is in farming. The landowners were hit hard in order to subsidize an industrial sector which turned out to be inefficient. And it was the landowners who were made to pay for it.
Eva Perón played her own role in alienating the old families who normally would have invited the president's wife to head their charitable societies.
The charity ladies went to greet the president, and he received them in bed, in his dressing gown. As they sat there, quite surprised by the reception they were getting from the president, a door opened, and out stepped this good-looking girl in a bathrobe. It was Eva Perón. The ladies just couldn't accept her. She excluded herself.
Eva Perón would outshine the charity ladies and their charity. From her own show business milieu, she summoned a brilliant young dress designer, Paco Jaumandreu, to her apartment.
She came to the door herself. I was struck by her skin, the way she stood, her figure. I didn't like her clothes, and I told her so. I told her she was dressed like a second-rate tango singer. You're pretty fresh, aren't you, she said. And what would you have me wear for my first mass rally? It was autumn, so I said, a suit. I made her that famous suit that's been seen in photographs all over the world.
Eva's instincts were right. This was the benefactor the people wanted. A poor kid dressing up, not an aristocrat dressing down. She turned charity into a political force.
Eva Perón's arrival created a huge commotion in Tafe Viejo. Everybody came to this train station where we are now just to be with her, if only for an instant. Because Eva Perón was the symbol of a better future for all Argentines.
Eva was only 33 when she died of cancer in 1952. The 2 weeks of lying in state in Buenos Aires, the millions of mourners, the regal funeral have become legendary images of Argentina. Even before Eva's death, Perón's government had begun to falter. The money was running out, in part because the hard-pressed landowners were producing less. Perón cracked down, widening the divisions.
There was persecution. My family experienced it. I went through it at the university. We had to carry guns. We couldn't speak freely, even in our own home, for fear of ending up in jail. It was a period when civil liberties did not exist.
In 1955, old Argentina reasserted itself. Conservative elements of the military shelled and bombed the main square in Buenos Aires, where Perón had his office. Eva had wanted to arm the workers, but Perón, the army general, could not accept the people's militia. Instead, he slipped away into exile, averting civil war, but leaving Argentina more bitterly divided than ever. In an old shed in Tafe Viejo lies the rusting hulk of Perón's great locomotive of state. Ever since his fall, successive governments have tried vainly to haul Argentina out of Perón's shadow. Not even his death in 1974 ended the divisions. Right-wing Peronists formed death squads. Left-wing factions of his party split away and took up arms. In 1976, the army presented itself again as the only force embodying the nation and claimed that the threat was more than a leftist guerrilla movement.
It was much more than that. You could see them at work in the universities, for example. And the people involved weren't necessarily the students who went on demonstrations. Clearly, there were activists.
And there were intellectuals who felt that this was perfectly all right, which it wasn't, not in my view.
What followed was the most terrifying repression Argentina has ever known. It is now called the Dirty War. These two sisters, shopping with their grandmother in Buenos Aires, are today living the legacy of that period. In July 1977, their parents were rounded up. Their mother was a school teacher, their father a student of philosophy. Baby Maria was seized with them.
When they kidnapped my mom and dad, I was 18 months old. My mom was 8 months pregnant. I spent 10 days in the concentration camp where they took them.
That photograph is from when she was 14 months old. The day after it was taken, we discovered through the neighbors that her parents had been taken away, with her in their arms, my daughter and her husband. And they took a baby basket because my daughter was 8 months pregnant.
For several days, Aide Lemos knew nothing. Then one evening around midnight, baby Maria reappeared, abandoned without explanation at the entrance of Aide's home. There was no word of the parents. Only gradually did Aide learn that she was not alone. Other mothers and grandmothers like herself, in an act of defiant courage, began assembling regularly in the main square of Buenos Aires. With their white headscarves, they became a kind of national conscience, forcing everyone to understand what was happening in Argentina.
¿Por qué no nos dicen a nosotros si están vivos, si están muertos? ¿Por qué no nos dicen? Si le buscamos eso nada más. Que nos respondan nada más, después nos retiramos.
¿Cuántos son ustedes?
Miles de mujeres, miles
en todo el país, miles.
The army was attempting to remove, clandestinely and without legal process, a whole generation of political thought which they judged to be subversive.
There were many intellectuals who considered the existing system, or the way society was organized, to be very unjust, and they thought it ought to be changed. Whether they were right or wrong, it was very difficult to establish a clear line between those who sincerely believed in this and those who were part of the ideological apparatus of the guerrillas, which had spread everywhere. This made fighting them difficult, and possibly even led to mistakes being made, I believe, sometimes serious ones, among those of us whose task it was to suppress that activity, which was real enough, and which tried to change the Argentine way of life.
Only later, with the eventual collapse of the regime, did firm information filter through to the mothers. 10 years after the disappearance, Aide Lemos learned that her daughter had given birth to a baby girl in the detention center. The child was still alive. She was traced to the house of a policewoman formerly connected with the detention center. Legal action was launched to recover the child, though not before some soul-searching by the investigating judge.
She was 10 years old and had lived 10 years thinking that those people she was with were her mother and father. But we knew that it was our duty somehow to make up for this awful history which we Argentines have gone through. The only possible compensation was to give back at least something of what had been taken away.
So the news was broken to the child that her mother was an imposter.
I don't think I was so upset by the fact that she wasn't my mother. It was as if I had known all along. I was upset because I was living with them, and suddenly I wasn't anymore. But afterwards, you want your real home, not the one that's been given to you.
For years, I'd known I might have a brother or sister. I found out after she did, I think. The day I had to go to court, in fact. They said, "We're going to court." What for? "Oh, because you're going to meet your sister." Oh, that's interesting.
At the court, the two girls were left alone together in the judge's office.
After less than an hour, but it felt like an extremely long wait, the door of the office opened. Maria came running up to me and said, "You're the best judge in the world." Meanwhile, Maria Jose was tugging at me. She grabbed her sister's arm and said, "Show him, show him."
Well, I have this mole on my arm, and she says, "Oh, you have the same mole as I do." And it came out in the papers that we recognized each other because we had the same mole. I almost died. I don't like people talking about where I have my moles.
Aide took her new granddaughter home. Anxiously, she watched for signs that the child was unhappy, that all this was a mistake. But all she found were occasional reminders that Maria Jose had inhabited another world, one of policemen and guns.
She'd tell me to watch the door. She says, "Don't you have a gun?" I say, "No, why would I have a gun?" She says, "If a thief came, this is what you do." And she'd make as if to aim. I say, "Okay, I'll aim at the legs." "No," she says, "you've got to aim here. Hitting the legs won't kill him. Here, he's out of it."
The girl's parents were never found and are presumed to be among the thousands who were killed in the dirty war.
Sacar el cargador. Dar un golpe de manivela. Sacar el tapón.
In the barracks of Argentina's oldest regiment, the 1st Patricians, is a board commemorating their campaigns. The dirty war is there, listed as the struggle against subversion. It was their first war for 100 years. By 1982, the dirty war had been won, but the nation was still fragmented. The junta had not been able to stop the country's slide into economic chaos, and not even the atmosphere of fear could prevent a nationwide protest strike against the generals. There was one issue alone that could unite Argentina. The generals decided to stake everything on it. 3 days after the national strike, the next war on the battle list, the Malvinas campaign, was launched. 150 years earlier, 2 British warships had sailed to the remote Malvinas, or Falkland Islands, 400 miles off the southern coast of Argentina. They drove out a small Argentine settlement. Ever since, the Argentines have wanted the islands back.